Listen closely because this is where transformation begins. When someone who has spent their entire life running from closeness suddenly turns around and starts walking toward it, that's not casual. That's not ordinary. That's a revolution happening inside a human soul. You have to understand something at a deep level. People don't change because it's easy. They change because the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of stepping into the unknown. And for someone who avoids emotional intimacy, that fear, it's been their identity, their shield, their survival strategy. So when they choose to lean in instead of pull away, when they choose to stay present instead of disappearing, when they choose to communicate instead of shutting down, this is not small. This is courage in its rawest form. But here's the truth you must anchor yourself in. Change is not proven in a moment of intensity. It is proven in patterns of behavior over time. Anyone can feel something deeply for a day. Transformation is when that feeling becomes a standard, a discipline, a way of being. And if they are truly stepping into this change, what you're witnessing is the collapse of an old identity and the birth of a new one. That process is messy. It's uncomfortable. It's uncertain. Growth always is. You don't rush it. You don't control it. You witness it. You respect it. And you decide, does it align with your values? Because love is not just about emotion. It's about alignment, vision, and truth. Here's the deeper principle. No one changes sustainably for someone else. They may begin there, inspired by connection, by love, by the fear of loss, but lasting change happens when it becomes part of who they believe they are. So if an avoidant is changing, what they're really saying is, I am no longer committed to the story that kept me safe but alone. I am ready to risk connection even if it scares me. That is powerful. But never forget your role is not to become their healer, their savior, or their emotional anchor. Your role is to stand in your own strength, your own clarity, your own worth. Because the strongest relationships are not built on dependency, they are built on two people choosing growth, again and again. And if they continue to show up, to stretch, to evolve, then you're not just witnessing change, you're witnessing transformation. And transformation is where real love lives. Awareness is where everything begins, even though most people underestimate its power. When someone who has spent years avoiding emotional closeness suddenly starts to recognize their own patterns, they begin to see themselves in a new light. That moment is not small, it is the opening of a door that has been locked for a long time. You have to understand that avoidant behavior doesn't just appear out of nowhere, it is built over time as a form of protection. It becomes a strategy to stay safe, to stay in control, to avoid pain. And when that strategy has been running unconsciously for years, bringing it into awareness is like turning on the lights in a room that has always been dark. Most people live their lives reacting without ever questioning why they react the way they do. But the second someone pauses and says, wait, this is what I do when I feel overwhelmed. This is how I push people away. This is how I shut down. Something powerful is happening. They are stepping out of autopilot. They are no longer being driven by old conditioning. They are beginning to observe it. And in that observation lies the seed of change. For an avoidant individual, awareness can feel uncomfortable, even threatening, because now they can see the gap between what they say they want, connection, closeness, love, and what their actions have been creating, distance, confusion, disconnection. That realization can create internal tension. But that tension is not something to fear, it is something to value. It means they are waking up. It means they are no longer numb to their own patterns. And here's the deeper truth. You cannot change what you are not aware of. No strategy, no advice, no external pressure can create lasting transformation if a person is still blind to their own behavior. Awareness is what breaks denial. It's what dissolves the illusion that this is just how I am and replaces it with a more empowering belief. This is something I've learned and therefore something I can change. When awareness begins, choice is born. Before that, everything feels automatic. They withdraw without thinking. They create distance without realizing it. But once awareness enters the picture, those same actions start to feel different. Now there is a moment to pause where they can see themselves about to pull away. And in that pause lies power. Because now, Instead of reacting, they have the opportunity to respond differently. It's also important to recognize that awareness is not a one-time event. It's a process. At first, they may only notice their patterns after the fact, after they've already shut down or created distance. But even that is progress. Over time, that awareness starts to move earlier and earlier into the moment until eventually they can catch themselves in real time. And that's when real transformation accelerates. But awareness also requires honesty, and honesty requires courage, because seeing your patterns clearly means taking responsibility for them. It means no longer blaming circumstances or other people for the way you show up. And for someone who has built their identity around independence and emotional distance, that level of self-confrontation can feel intense. Yet this is where growth truly begins. Not in perfection, not in immediate change, but in the willingness to see yourself clearly without running from what you find. Because once someone can do that, once they can face their own patterns without escaping, they are no longer trapped by them. They are evolving. Discomfort is the territory where real change is forged, and for someone with avoidant tendencies, that territory feels unfamiliar and at times overwhelming. Their entire emotional system has been wired to seek safety through distance. When things get too close, too real, too emotionally intense, the instinct is to step back, to regain control, to create space. That pattern has likely protected them for years, maybe even decades. So when they begin choosing discomfort instead of retreat, they are going directly against their conditioning, and that is not a small decision. You have to understand, for an avoidant, vulnerability doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel safe. It can feel like standing exposed without armor, like stepping into a situation where they might lose control, be judged, or be hurt. So when they choose to stay present in a moment where every instinct is telling them to withdraw, that choice is intentional. It is deliberate. It is a signal that something inside them is shifting from protection to participation. This is where the real work begins. Because discomfort is not just a one-time experience. It shows up again and again in different forms. It appears in conversations that require emotional honesty, in moments where they have to express needs instead of suppressing them, in situations where they must listen instead of shutting down. Each of these moments asks the same question. Will you go back to what feels safe, or will you step into what creates growth? And growth always demands a price. The price is comfort. The price is certainty. The price is the familiar identity that says, this is just who I am. When someone starts paying that price willingly, when they begin leaning into situations that challenge their old patterns, they are more likely to succeed. They are proving that change is not just an idea, it is becoming a commitment. But here's the critical distinction. Discomfort alone does not create transformation. It is intentional discomfort that does. Anyone can feel uncomfortable and still run away from it. What matters is the decision to stay, to engage, to move through it rather than escape it. That is where resilience is built. That is where emotional capacity expands. At first, this process can feel awkward, even unnatural. They may stumble in their attempts to communicate. They may not always get it right. There will be moments where they fall back into old habits, because those habits are deeply ingrained. But the difference now is that they are no longer unconscious of those patterns. They feel the tension between who they used to be and who they are trying to become. And that tension is powerful. It creates a kind of internal pressure that pushes them forward. Because once someone experiences even a small taste of deeper connection, once they realize that vulnerability does not automatically lead to pain, their perspective begins to shift. What once felt like a threat starts to look like an opportunity. This is also where trust begins to develop, not just trust in others, but trust in themselves. Every time they face discomfort and survive it, every time they stay present instead of withdrawing, they gather evidence that they are capable of more than they believed. That evidence becomes a new foundation, replacing fear with confidence, avoidance with engagement. Choosing discomfort is, in many ways, choosing growth over identity. It means letting go of the version of themselves that relied on distance and control and stepping into a version that is open, responsive, and connected. And that transition requires patience because it is not linear. There will be progress, setbacks, breakthroughs, and moments of doubt. But as long as the choice remains intentional, as long as they keep leaning into discomfort instead of away from it, they are moving in the direction of transformation. Consistency is where intention either becomes real or fades into illusion. Anyone can say the right words in an emotional moment. Anyone can promise change when they feel the fear of losing something meaningful. But words, no matter how sincere they sound, are only the beginning. What truly defines transformation is what happens after the emotion settles, when there is no urgency, no pressure, no immediate consequence. That is where patterns either repeat or evolve. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this distinction is critical. In moments of clarity, they may genuinely want to be different. They may express a desire to stay, to communicate, to be present. And in that moment, they mean it. But without consistency, those intentions remain temporary states rather than permanent shifts. Real change requires those same choices to show up again and again, not just when it feels intense, but when it feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, or even unnecessary. You have to understand that consistency is not built on motivation. Motivation rises and falls. It is influenced by emotion, by circumstances, by energy levels, but consistency is built on standards. It is built on a decision that this is who I am, becoming regardless of how I feel in the moment. And for an avoidant individual, this means choosing connection even when distance feels easier, choosing communication even when silence feels safer. This is where discipline enters the picture. Not discipline in a rigid or forceful sense, but in a grounded, intentional way. It is the discipline to check in instead of disappearing, the discipline to express rather than suppress, the discipline to stay engaged when the instinct is to withdraw. Each of these actions may seem small on their own, but over time they create a new pattern, a new normal. And patterns are powerful, because once something becomes a pattern, it no longer requires the same level of effort. It begins to feel natural. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel familiar. What once required conscious effort starts to happen more automatically. This is how identity shifts, not through one big moment, but through repeated choices that reinforce a new way of being. Consistency also builds trust, and trust is the foundation of any meaningful connection. When someone shows up the same way over time, when their actions align with their words repeatedly, it creates a sense of reliability. It tells the other person, you don't have to guess where I stand, you don't have to brace for sudden distance or confusion. That stability is not just comforting, it is transformative for the relationship itself. But consistency is tested in the moments when it is hardest to maintain. It is easy to be present when everything feels good. It is easy to communicate when there is no conflict. The real test comes when emotions run high, when misunderstandings occur, when old triggers are activated. In those moments, the pull toward old patterns can be strong. The instinct to shut down, to create space, to avoid discomfort can resurface quickly. What matters is not perfection in those moments, but persistence. It is the willingness to return to the new path even after into the old one. It is the recognition that change is not about never falling back, but about not staying there. Each time they catch themselves and choose differently, they strengthen the new pattern. Over time, these repeated efforts accumulate. They begin to outweigh the old behaviors. The identity of someone who avoids starts to be replaced by the identity of someone who shows up. And that shift is not declared, it is demonstrated quietly and consistently through action. Because in the end, consistency is the evidence of truth. It is what separates a moment of desire from a lifetime of change. Independence, for someone with avoidant tendencies, has often been defined in a very specific way. Self-reliance at all costs, emotional distance as a form of control, and a belief that needing others somehow weakens personal strength. Over time, this definition becomes deeply ingrained. It shapes how they see relationships, how they respond to closeness, and how they protect themselves from vulnerability. But when real change begins, one of the most important shifts is not abandoning independence, it's redefining what it truly means. Because the truth is, independence was never meant to mean isolation. It was never meant to mean shutting people out or carrying everything alone. Real independence is not about proving you don't need anyone, it's about knowing you can stand strong on your own while still choosing to connect with others. It's about having a solid sense of self that doesn't collapse in the presence of intimacy. For an avoidant individual, this realization can feel almost disorienting at first. They may have built their identity around being the one who doesn't rely on others, the one who keeps control by maintaining distance. So when they begin to open up, when they allow someone closer than they ever have before, it can feel like they are losing a part of themselves. But in reality, they are not losing independence, they are expanding it. Because true strength is not measured by how well you can avoid connection. It is measured by how well you can remain grounded within yourself while being fully present with someone else. It's the ability to say, I am still me even when I am close to you. I don't disappear in this connection, and I don't have to run from it either. This is where the concept of healthy interdependence comes into play. It's not dependency, where one person loses themselves in another. And it's not avoidance, where one person refuses closeness to maintain control. It's a balanced space where both individuals bring their whole selves into the relationship strong, aware, and connected. For someone shifting out of avoidance, this means learning new behaviors and, more importantly, new beliefs. It means recognizing that asking for support does not diminish their strength. It means understanding that sharing emotions does not make them vulnerable in a negative sense. It makes them real, human, and capable of deeper connection. It means seeing that closeness does not equal loss of control, but rather an opportunity for growth. This redefinition also changes how they experience relationships. Instead of seeing connection as something that threatens their autonomy, they begin to see it as something that enhances their life. They realize that having someone who understands them, who supports them, who challenges them to grow, does not limit their freedom, it enriches it. But this shift doesn't happen overnight. There will be moments where the old definition of independence tries to pull them back. Moments where they feel the urge to retreat, to reestablish distance, to regain that familiar sense of control. And in those moments, they are faced with a choice. Return to the old belief that closeness equals loss, or lean into the new understanding that connection and independence can coexist. Each time they choose the latter, they reinforce a new identity. They begin to experience independence, not as something fragile that must be protected, but as something stable that can exist alongside intimacy. And that realization is freeing because it removes the false dilemma of either I keep my independence or I have a relationship. Now, the equation changes. Now it becomes I can be fully myself and still be deeply connected. And that is where real emotional maturity begins to take shape. Love, in its most transformative form, is not something that forces change, it awakens it. And when an avoidant begins to shift, it's essential to understand the difference between changing for someone and changing because something inside them has been activated. At the surface level, it may look like they are doing it for you. The effort, the presence, the willingness to open up, it can all appear to be driven by the relationship. But if that change is going to last, it cannot remain external. It has to become internal, because when love is treated as a crutch, it creates pressure. It turns the relationship into the sole source of motivation, the only reason to grow, the only anchor holding the change in place. And the problem with that is simple. Anything built on external pressure is unstable. The moment the pressure shifts through conflict, distance, or uncertainty, the change begins to weaken. Not because the desire disappears, but because it was never fully owned. But when love becomes a catalyst, everything changes. A catalyst doesn't carry the weight of transformation. It sparks it. It initiates something deeper. It creates awareness, ignites desire, and opens the door. But the person walking through that door must choose to keep going, not because they have to, but because they see the value in who they are becoming. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this distinction is critical. If they are only stretching themselves emotionally to keep someone from leaving, they are still operating from fear. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. And fear, while powerful in the short term, is not sustainable in the long run. It leads to burnout, resistance, and eventually a return to old patterns. But when the shift comes from a deeper place, when they begin to realize, I don't want to live the rest of my life disconnected. I don't want to keep repeating the same cycles. I want something more meaningful, more real. That's when the change starts to root itself. Now, the relationship is no longer the reason for growth, it is the environment where growth is expressed. This also transforms how they show up. Instead of seeing effort as something they have to do to maintain the connection, they begin to see it as something they get to do as part of becoming a more open, more present version of themselves. Communication becomes less of a task and more of a choice. Vulnerability becomes less of a risk and more of an opportunity. And here's where it gets even deeper. When love is a catalyst, it expands beyond the relationship itself. The growth doesn't stay contained within that one connection. It starts influencing other areas of their life. They become more self-aware, more emotionally available, more willing to face challenges instead of avoiding them. The change becomes part of their identity, not just their behavior in one specific context. This is the difference between temporary adjustment and lasting transformation. A crutch creates dependency. It says, I can only be this way as long as this person is here. A catalyst creates empowerment. It says, this connection showed me what's possible, and now I choose to continue this path because it aligns with who I want to be. And when someone reaches that point, their actions carry a different energy. There is less resistance, less internal conflict, less need for external validation. Their growth becomes self-sustaining because it is no longer tied to keeping something, it is tied to becoming someone. That is when love fulfills its highest purpose. Not as something that holds you up, but as something that wakes you up. And now, after everything you've heard, everything you've felt, everything that may be shifting inside you in this very moment, this is where it all comes together. Because the real question is not whether an avoidant can change. The real question is, what kind of change are you witnessing? Is it temporary, driven by emotion and fear? Or is it grounded, intentional, and becoming part of who they are? You've seen the signs: awareness, placing denial, discomfort being chosen instead of avoided, consistency beginning to shape new patterns, independence being redefined instead of defended, and love transforming from something that pressures into something that awakens. That's not surface-level change. That's a human being stepping beyond their past and into possibility. But here is the truth you must carry with strength and clarity. Transformation is a path, not a promise. It unfolds over time through actions, through choices, through moments where the old self whispers, go back, and the new self says, keep going. And the only way you truly know what is real is by what continues. So don't get lost in potential. Don't anchor yourself to words alone. Witness the pattern. Feel the consistency. Observe the direction. Because real change leaves evidence that shows up again and again, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is watching. And at the same time, stay rooted in your own truth, your standards, your values, your emotional well-being. Because the most powerful relationships are not built on one person changing for the other. They are built on two people rising, expanding, and choosing growth together. If they are truly evolving, you won't have to chase clarity. You won't have to force connection. You will feel the shift not just in what they say, but in how they show up, how they stay, how they meet you where you are. That's when something extraordinary happens. Because when two people stop running from themselves, they stop running from each other. And that's where real connection begins. So take this with you. Honor growth, but require consistency. Appreciate effort, but trust patterns. Stay open, but stay grounded. Because love at its highest level is not just something you feel, it's something you build consciously, courageously, and over time. Thank you for being present, for being willing to see deeper, and for being open to understanding the complexity of real human change. And wherever you are on this journey, whether you are the one evolving or the one witnessing that evolution, move forward with clarity, strength, and self-respect. Goodbye, and keep choosing growth.